All right, let's get right into it. We're taking a close look at Ecuador in late 2025. And what you see is a country that is a total paradox. On one hand, you've got a government with a brand new, powerful democratic mandate. But on the other hand, the country is being hit by crises so bad they could literally bring down the entire state. It's a real puzzle. And that really gets us to the heart of the matter here. How is it possible for a leader to win a huge election, but just a few months later be in charge of a nation that's both fighting an internal armed conflict and watching its basic infrastructure, like the power grid, completely fall apart? That's the mystery we're going to unpack together. You know, to really get a handle on this, there's a term we need to understand: fragile stabilization. Think of it like Ecuador is walking a tightrope. The government has the permission slip, the political legitimacy to get things done. But all the things that are going wrong, from gang wars to historic drought, are making it almost impossible to actually govern. They're basically winning and losing at the exact same time. So let's start with that political win, because this is where the first big contradiction really pops up. It's a fascinating story about the difference between the power a president thinks he has after an election and what the people are actually willing to give him. President Daniel Noboa didn't just squeak by in the election. He won big with a solid 11-point lead. And pretty much everyone saw that as a massive green light from the public for his tough, iron fist approach to crime. But here's where it gets complicated. That green light for security? Yeah, it turns out it wasn't a blank check, and the Ecuadorian people were about to draw a very clear line in the sand. See, when President Noboa went to the people and asked them to change the constitution to allow foreign military bases on their soil, the answer was a resounding no. And it wasn't even close. We're talking about 6 out of every 10 voters rejecting the idea. It was a huge political loss for the government. So what does that tell us? The message from the voters was actually really specific. They're saying, yes, we are desperate for security, but not at any cost. There's this deep-seated distrust of foreign military involvement. They want security for sure, but they want it on Ecuadorian terms. All right, so let's shift gears and look at what happens when that demand for security is put into practice, because this war on crime is having a real and often brutal effect on the country. The government's whole strategy is called the Phoenix Plan, and really it's about militarizing public safety. They legally reclassified more than 20 criminal gangs as terrorist groups. And that's a huge deal, because it allows the armed forces to fight them directly on the streets, blurring that line between policing and actual warfare. So you think, okay, military on the streets, that should fix things, right? Well, not exactly. Despite this massive deployment, the reality for people has actually gotten even more grim. The violence hasn't stopped. In a lot of ways, it's just changed and gotten worse. Just look at this number, 44.5. That's the homicide rate per 100,000 people. That rate made the first half of 2025 the single most violent 6-month period in the entire history of Ecuador. The so-called internal armed conflict is not stopping the bloodshed. And the gangs? Well, they're smart. They're adapting. With their drug trafficking routes getting disrupted, they've pivoted to new ways of making money. Kidnapping has skyrocketed by an almost unbelievable 2,500%. And extortion, which they call vacunas, or vaccines, has become this terrifying daily tax on just trying to run a business or live your life. And of course, a war like this always has a human cost. International groups are raising some really serious alarms about how the security forces are behaving. This is tough, but it's important. This quote from Amnesty International lays out the stakes. It describes a specific case where 4 children were detained by military personnel in Guayaquil and were later found dead. And this isn't just a one-off tragedy. It's part of what's being documented as a pattern of disappearances and abuses by state forces. So just imagine, you have this spiraling security crisis, and then layered right on top of it is another emergency. This one is crippling the country's infrastructure and has literally plunged the economy into darkness. Let's just walk through the domino effect here. First, the worst drought in 60 years hits. That means the reservoirs for the hydroelectric dams, which supply over 70% of the country's power, run dangerously low. So what happens? By late 2025, the entire nation is dealing with rolling blackouts, sometimes for 12 to 14 hours a day. It just paralyzes everything. So what does that do for investor confidence? Well, this number tells the whole story. In 2024, Ecuador only managed to attract $232 million in foreign investment. That's the lowest it's been in 14 years. I mean, the message from the global market is pretty clear. With this level of insecurity and an unreliable power grid, stay away. Now, hearing all that, it would be so easy to just assume this is a country about to completely collapse. But that's not the full picture, not even close. In the middle of all this darkness, you find these incredible pockets of strength and resilience. Take the economy. Parts of it are fighting back. The shrimp export industry is on fire. Revenues have jumped 23%. They're still the world's #1 exporter of bananas. And in a really clever move, they've managed to keep tourism alive by creating a sort of Galapagos bubble, protecting it from the troubles on the mainland. And, this resilience, it runs so much deeper than just the economy. It's in the country's very identity. It's in its mind-blowing biodiversity, in the fierce independence of its indigenous communities protecting their land, in its amazing cultural heritage, and even in its young people, who still show up for concerts, which, when you think about it, is its own form of resistance. So, when you put all these pieces together, the politics, the brutal war on crime, the failing power grid, and this incredible deep well of resilience, what you get is a nation standing at a major, major crossroads as it looks toward 2026. You can almost see two totally different futures branching out from here. In the best-case scenario, the rains come back, a trade deal with the U.S. kicks the economy into gear, and the security forces finally start getting control. But the pessimistic path? The drought continues, the gangs get even more violent, and the country faces a real risk of economic default and massive protests. And that leaves us with the one big, urgent question. Is that Phoenix Plan going to live up to its name and let the country rise from the ashes? Or will Ecuador get swallowed by these two fires raging at once, organized crime and climate collapse? Whatever happens, the next year is going to be absolutely decisive.